One thing that I think is on a lot of people's minds when it comes to living or traveling overseas, living the nomad capitalist lifestyle, where you're going between different destinations much of the time, going between different homes around the world, is, will I be safe? How will my safety be impacted? And a lot of us have grown up in countries where we're told, hey, here it's safe. Other places it may not be safe. Oftentimes, the countries that people think, oh, that's the safe country. Not only are they not safe in many cases, but you're going to spend a lot of money to live there. And what's interesting is many people where I come from, the United States, and perhaps in other Western countries, will say, everyone wants to move to our country because it's safe. And then you look at the data in the United States. It's actually not that safe. In fact, even though we're only going to talk about some of the safest countries in Europe, only 2 countries in all of Europe have more murders per capita than the United States, Russia and Ukraine. And so it really depends on how you define safety. If you're looking to avoid petty crime, you probably don't want to live in Barcelona. I know multiple people who've had watches stolen right off their wrist. There goes 50,000 euros. It's running right down the street with a gang of hoodlums. If you're looking to avoid more serious crimes like rape and murder, then that's what we're going to focus on today. But you really have to understand that the brand name countries that are promoted as safe, the ones that everyone wants to move to, aren't particularly safe. The US, the UK, Australia. These countries, they just don't, on a global level, when you look at objective data, they don't really match up against some of these countries. And so quite frankly, if you're coming from the United States and you're looking for a place that's safe, you can apparently just throw a dart and move pretty much anywhere. But then the factor becomes, where do I pay less in tax? Now, the first place that's an old staple of high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals is Monaco. Very small place. Easy to immigrate there if you're willing to put €500,000. In theory, it's going to be more in the bank, and rent or buy a property and commit to spending a decent amount of time there every year. 0 income tax, pretty much the only place in Europe where you can do that. Pretty safe place in their 1 square kilometer. Everyone lives in harmony with their Ferraris and their Lamborghinis and their €41 hamburgers. Nice place to be. A little constricting if you actually have to spend your time in the principality, but very nice place to be, and you can get safety, low taxes, and you can park some of your money and get some asset protection all in one. The second country is Andorra, nestled between Spain and France. It's in the Pyrenees, in the mountains. You will be left alone. Very safe place. Very little crime. I have a number of friends who have lived there at one point or currently live there. And there are some places, we just leave the back door open, we don't lock the car. Very safe place. Again, you get to park some money in the bank. You can buy real estate there. You can get a residence permit there. Now, both of these countries, Monaco and Andorra, pretty difficult to get citizenship in. But as a place to live, Andorra, low taxes. We're talking 0 up to 10%, depending on what you're doing. And so, pretty good place to live if you want not the French Riviera lifestyle, but if you want more of the mountain, ski, summer living in the mountains lifestyle, not a bad place to be. Number 3, another staple of the wealthy, Switzerland, pretty safe place. And again, if you're willing to move there, unlike the first 2 countries, you actually do have to pay some tax, and it's going to be hundreds of thousands of Swiss francs a year for most people, but it's a flat tax. And so, while Andorra works better for someone who perhaps is just starting out, you're making a 6 or 7 figure income, Switzerland, you can make pretty much as much money as you want once you pay this flat tax. There are certainly intricacies to the flat tax in Switzerland, or the lump sum tax. We've talked about that in a separate video here on our channel. You can find out more about those types of programs. Certainly a safe place, certainly offers livability, and you can negotiate that tax down to this lump sum. Number 4 is actually not a country. It is the island of Jersey. And we've talked about Jersey before as a great alternative. I think Jersey is something that a lot of people should look at, especially if they're looking to move to a place like New Zealand, for example, because you've got a bit more of that temperate climate. You're near the United Kingdom. That gives you an idea of kind of what part of the world that you're in. But you have this sort of British sensibility. I was looking at some of the crime stats in Jersey. It's almost kind of laughable. I think there's like 100 people in jail in Jersey. And very safe place. Obviously, you're on an island. It can be very constricting, but you've got this sense of community with the British sensibilities, and you can pay a flat tax of about $200,000 a year, 145,000 British pounds. And then 1% above that, you can even work on that 1% if it's objectionable to you. Very safe place to live, certainly more of a place for families. Again, I've suggested it as an alternative to a place like New Zealand. If you're looking for a place to live in that English-speaking part of the world. Especially interesting if you want a place where you can just bounce up and down to London and then go anywhere you want in the world, to travel wherever you want. Very safe, very livable, perhaps not the most exciting place. And if you are a 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur, the tax rate effectively becomes single digits at some point. The fifth place, let's talk about places that are a bit more accessible. Portugal. When you look at some of the data, Portugal is actually one of the safer countries in Europe, and it's become a hub for a lot of nomads, people who spend time in different homes around the world. But the crime data in Portugal actually seems quite reasonable. And so they have a 10-year tax exemption. Now, I've described it as a tax exemption that is kind of like the Swiss cheese of tax exemptions. There are many different obstacles that you have to deal with. You can't have your company in certain places. Certain types of income is treated differently than others. You really want to do some comprehensive tax planning before you just assume you go to Portugal and don't change anything, right? But if you structure your life and your business affairs properly, then Portugal can be a relatively tax-free place. Not entirely tax-free in most cases. Certainly a good place for cryptocurrency investors. They have flocked to Portugal. Not a bad place to get a second citizenship if you're willing to put the time in on the ground. Different immigration programs available. And again, relatively safe, relatively tax-friendly, with the caveat, as with pretty much every country in Europe, that tax friendliness does require planning. It's not as simple as moving to Costa Rica or to Thailand, where the tax planning is much more simple. In Europe, there's always a bit more nuance, but you can get the job done. And the other country that works at the borders of Europe, if you will, is Georgia. Tax-friendly country. Not only are they going to exempt most income from out of the country, there are some caveats to that. They also have, for people who live there full-time, a private entrepreneur scheme. You can pay as little as 1% tax. Again, when structured properly and you make the proper designations, you don't just show up, but can be done relatively easily. And obviously Georgia, one of the cheapest places to live in Europe. You could easily live for $1,000 a month. And so when we talk about safety, there's a couple different elements. One thing that I think we've seen in 2020 with the pandemic is how well many Asian countries have fared in that regard. Not in terms of crime, but just in terms of very low cases. They've reopened faster than other countries. Life got back to normal faster, and you've seen everywhere from Taiwan to Vietnam to Cambodia to Malaysia to Thailand do a pretty good job of handling this. South Korea at one point was pretty well lauded as well. And so Asia, in my opinion, has been a great place to be, and there are certainly some trade-offs that get you to that point. But I think that, in comparison to most of the rest of the world, people that I know who are in Asia feel much safer than people who are in the United States. It's an important thing to note. As to crime, if you look at crime statistics on websites like Numbeo, we look at a number of different reports that we use for our Nomad Passport Index and just in our daily business. The safest part of Asia that people don't really think about is the Gulf. In fact, for 6 years in a row, Qatar has been ranked as the safest country in the world. It may not be the most exciting place in the world to live, but certainly it has quality of life. You have lots of amenities. Everything is very well developed. You've got one of the best airports in the world from which to fly out of. And you have, of course, very favorable tax policies. Hard to beat zero. Not so far away, the UAE, home to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, similar tax policies. Probably a bit easier if you're an investor or an entrepreneur. You can start a company, you can buy real estate as your means to getting a residence permit there. Probably also a bit more livable for most Westerners. You can have some of the most incredible malls. If you've never been to Dubai, for example, if you come from where I'm from in the United States, you'll see some of the most incredible restaurants that you remember from back home. You can go to the Cheesecake Factory and you go to Tim Hortons, get a donut, go to Starbucks. You've got really a great quality of life. And again, hard to beat a tax rate of zero. One of the safest countries in the world. If you look at what people traditionally think of in the West as Asia, East Asia, whether it's Southeast Asia or Northern Asia, you've got a lot of safe countries. Japan, South Korea always top the list. Taiwan is also in the top 5 or 10 on pretty much every list. These countries sometimes have special tax regimes for foreigners. If you come in a certain way, it can become complicated in countries like Japan. In countries like South Korea, they have some discounts for new expats on taxes, but it's not really super low. Southeast Asia is generally home to some of the most favorable tax regimes in the region. And while countries like the Philippines don't rank quite as highly, Singapore and even Hong Kong in the last year has ranked quite highly. Singapore always in the top 10 lists, including on the Western-centric list where they always talk about Iceland and Austria as the only places that you want to be. Singapore is always in the top 10, probably the safest place in Southeast Asia. Hong Kong, not technically in Southeast Asia, but despite everything that has happened, still relatively safe. And then beyond that, those are countries that potentially could pay very close to zero. Potentially you might be somewhere in the mid-teens. So tax-friendly, not necessarily tax-free, depending on where your business is structured, depending on what your investments are. If you're earning money from capital gains, those are countries where you're not going to pay much. If you're running a business, depends on how the business is structured. Again, you might pay 0, 2, 5, 8, 16%, whatever the case may be. A lot better than in the West. And again, Singapore, I mean, it's one of the safest places on earth. You will not see petty crime. You will not see violent crime. People are storing their assets there. It's just a really safe and harmonious place. And then you look at other places in Asia. I happen to spend a lot of time in Malaysia, for example. And if you look at some of these other countries, you may not see them ranked in the top 10. But I will say that when you compare Asia to places, for example, like Latin America, you see a lot less violent crime in Asia. Crime that does exist is largely petty. Now, every country has their own particular issues. But what I can say when it comes to safety is I do feel pretty safe in Asia. In fact, safer than anywhere else. My position on safety has been that in a lot of places, you can find safety by living in the right neighborhood. Far too often, people compare, moving from Beverly Hills to the worst part of Bogota, for example. I have a home in Bogota. I've been to Colombia many times, all over the country, and I've never had any issues. I take basic precautions. I'm not going to bad parts of town. Perhaps it is not as safe as Tbilisi or Singapore, but I personally haven't had any issues. And I think if you create a lifestyle where you live in the right area, you can do that in any of these different places. Now, some of the countries in the Americas also aren't very tax-friendly, Colombia being one of them, at least if you're living there full-time. And there are exceptions to places like Honduras, where you can live in the Bay Islands, or Nicaragua, the only place where I've had a gun in my face. You can live in the Corn Islands. You can be removed from the big cities. But today I'm going to talk about some of the mainland countries that you might want to consider if you're looking for that Latin American living. Generally speaking, outside of the territorial tax countries like Panama, Costa Rica, most of the tax-friendly, safe options in the Americas are going to be in southern South America. Okay, so we're talking about being relatively isolated from the rest of the world, not really any closer from Santiago, Chile, to the United States than it would be to pretty much anywhere in Europe. Okay, so one country that comes to mind is indeed Chile. One of the safest countries in the world. You can work towards one of the best passports in the world. And while tax rates aren't exactly low there, and I think that they're probably going up in the future, there is a 3-year, possibly 6-year tax holiday for foreigners on all of their foreign-sourced income. So if you're looking somewhere to live for a while, Chile is certainly a pretty developed country. Walking around Santiago, you might feel like you're in Vancouver or some kind of very well-kept city. And so particularly if you have a family, if you are married, not a bad option. Now, not so far away from Chile, relatively safe country in terms of actual safety. Not sure about the overall perception of the country, but Paraguay. Paraguay certainly has a bit of a black market reputation. It is a bit off the wall, but tax rates there are very low. As long as you make a pretty minimal income, you can take advantage of 10% tax rates in Paraguay. Income that you make outside of the country is generally not taxed. Not that difficult to get a residence permit, although more difficult than it used to be to get a citizenship due to too many people talking about it. And so if you want to be off the radar, if you want to be off the grid, I know people who live in Paraguay who feel it's very safe. And because there aren't really that many tourists there, you're not going to see as much tourist-related crime. So tax-friendly place, safe place to be. Certainly not nearly as developed as Chile, for example, but definitely somewhere that you can check out if you're looking to be a little bit off the radar. One country that is not talked about nearly enough, in my opinion, and we'd like to talk about more here, is Uruguay. I know some people from Uruguay. They all tend to think it's this kind of boring country, but it's a country that has a great passport that allows you to get residence through a number of different means. They have a new tax residence program where you buy real estate And you don't even have to spend that much time per year there, and you can use Uruguay as your tax residence globally. But if you want to live there full time, you can take advantage of up to a 10-year tax holiday where you're not going to pay tax on your foreign source income. And after that, you pay around 12%, mostly on dividends and interest income. And what's nice is Uruguay is not a fly-spec country. They have proper tax credits and tax treaties, and so you can use that to your advantage to make sure you're not paying double tax. Very safe country, got a lot of coastline, a lot of Argentina citizens are moving there. Definitely a place that could be on your radar if you're looking for a place that's, again, more calm, seaside environment. Perhaps you're looking to make an investment somewhere to live. Not a bad place. Ecuador is another country that people have looked at for residence, for citizenship, for buying property. It was ranked one of the best places to retire a number of years in a row. And it definitely is a very affordable place and a very interesting part of the world. What Ecuador has is relatively non-violent crime, relatively safe, perhaps not as safe as Chile, for example, but a relatively safe place. A lot of people, again, who are older go and live there and really love it and enjoy it. Generally speaking, what you can do in Ecuador is take advantage of certain territorial income tax. The system is a bit more complicated in that you can't necessarily use low tax or zero tax jurisdictions to run your business. But if you have foreign source income and you're paying some kind of tax overseas, then generally speaking, you don't have to pay again in Ecuador. So if you're structuring your affairs properly overseas, you can pay a little bit of tax and then live in Ecuador and not have to pay additional tax. Now again, there are some other interesting options in the Americas. Certainly you can go to some of the islands in the Caribbean, from the Cayman Islands to Antigua to St. Kitts and Nevis. Anguilla, which is a British overseas territory, has the tax residence program, very low tax there. These islands, I think, are generally considered pretty safe, especially the more British islands. And so if you're looking for the Caribbean, you can do that as well. We also mentioned, again, the Bale Islands and the Corn Islands, both pretty tax-friendly countries if you structure things correctly, if you're looking to be off the grid. Costa Rica certainly could be a country in Central America that if you're living in outside of the capital city, perhaps in some of the beach areas, Tamarindo, Yaco Beach, could be interesting to consider. They have pretty tax-friendly policies as well. I don't think really any of the Central American capital cities I would call very safe. Panama City, definitely an exception. Tax-friendly Panama City, although not perhaps the safest place in the world. But again, I've said, you know what, if you buy in the right neighborhood, if you live in the right neighborhood, you'll be fine. You take the right precautions, perhaps more precautions to take there. But the point is, you can have a lifestyle where you're getting a lot of value. And I'm not talking, again, about, where do I get a 25-cent beer? I'm talking about where do I go and live a great life where I'm getting much more value for my money. I'm having that fine dining experience for a third of the price of what I would pay in New York City or London or Sydney. And I'm also doing so in a place that's more safe. Better quality of life, more safety, it does exist. The statistics you're seeing in the Western news media are biased towards the West. They ignore the countries we talk about. I think you should go where you're treated best and find the best of both of these worlds. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.